The 976 Harem pants sew along. Here is the pattern in the usual format. Always print page 2 first to check the scale. This style has an elasticated waistband, generous slanted pockets, and a band at the cuff, which sits on the instep. You could make them shorter, of course. This is good value, lightweight denim. Visit angelakane.com/sewing supplies to see where I source my fabric. The weight is just over 7 ounces per square yard. I have threads, including top stitching thread, waistband elastic, get the stiff sort that doesn't twist, interfacing for the band at the hem, and stay tape for the slanted pocket edge. It's easy to assemble my patterns. See the short video, the link is below. All the pieces are cut out and markings transferred. These are the main pieces, the fronts and backs. The pocket comprises the pocket facing and the under pocket. We have the waistband and lastly the hem bands. I have cut 2 pieces of sew-in interfacing for stiffening. I'm using sew-in because I have some, and in many ways I prefer it these days. So I'm pinning the interfacing in place and then basting around the 3 outside edges. And then catch stitching along what will be the folded edge. When I started sewing in the 60s, there was no such thing as iron-on interfacing. Now, looking back, I'm beginning to think sew-in is better, because the interfacing is stitched in the seam and then trimmed. It is much less likely to come adrift during laundering. And also, I think the iron-on is inclined to change the feel of the main fabric. So just take a few threads of the main fabric so that it doesn't show on the right side. Denim is very forgiving. You don't have to be an expert at hand sewing. That's done. Now to work on the main pieces. Here we have the pocket facing. Match it to the pocket opening on the front. Pin in place. Cut a generous piece of stay tape, which we will attach when we sew the seam. And the same for the other front. So machine through all layers, removing pins as you go, and aligning the stay tape along the seam line. The seam is very slightly curved, so make sure you follow it. The seam width guide is useful here. So the same with the other pocket. I've neatened the seam, and the pocket facings are pressed to the inside. Make sure you push out the seam. This tool, called an edge shaper, is useful for this. Push out as you press. Now for the top stitching. This is optional and always looks good on denim, of course. For top stitching, tighten the top tension and lengthen the stitch. Next, we will add the under pocket. Place on top of the pocket facing, matching the notches. Pin around the edge. And the same with the other side. Machine around the pocket edge, between the waist seam and the side seam. I have trimmed and neatened the edge. Overlock if you have a machine. Trim and zigzag is just as good. I want to keep the pocket in place, so pin at the edges and machine just inside the seam allowance to secure. Next, we join the fronts to the backs. Matching notches. Machine the seam. Trim, neaten and press the seam allowance towards the back, and then top stitch. A neat and secure end to the pocket opening. Next, we will stitch the inside leg seam. Match notches and pin. After machining, trim and neaten the seam allowance and press towards the back. To join the left and right pieces, turn one right side out and slip inside the other. Pin the crotch seam, matching the inside leg seam, and the notches. Machine, joining centre fronts and centre backs. Trim and neaten the seam allowance and press to one side. Then top stitch. I should have used my stitch compensation tool for this bumpy join. Now for the waistband, join the centre back seam and neaten the unnotched edge. With the pants inside out, pin pants and waistband right sides together. There will be a little bit of easing. Pinning is sufficient, as bumps won't notice once the waistband is gathered. Match notches and match dots to seams. I like to baste. Years ago I would sew over pins, but it's really not a safe practice. Machine the seam, then trim. Press the seam and the waistband up. Fold the waistband so that the seam lines meet. and pin all around. And then baste. Stitch in the ditch. Leave a 2 to 3 inch, 5 cm to 7.5 cm gap in your stitching at the centre back. Cut an ample length of elastic which you can adjust before joining. I suggest your waist measurement plus 5 inches, 12.5 centimetres. There are many ways to thread through elastic. A large safety pin is working well for me here. Once threaded through, overlap the ends by about an inch, 2.5 centimetres. Join securely. Close off the seam by stitching in the ditch from the right side. That is the waistband finished. Now for the hems. Join the ends together. Trim the interfacing to the stitching line. And trim the seam allowance. Press the seam open. Run 2 rows of gathering stitches at the hemline, stopping and starting at the seams. For gathering, lengthen the stitch, loosen the top tension, and stitch either side of the seam line and from the right side of the fabric. I have trimmed and neatened the inside seam allowance, and I have pressed in the fold. So unfold the cuff. The pants are inside out. Turn the cuff right side out. Match the seam to the inside leg seam. Pin all around, matching the notches and distributing the fullness evenly. Pull up the gathering threads and pin, distributing the gathers evenly. Use tweezers to help over lumps and bumps. No need to be too fussy, it won't show if it's uneven. Remove the gathering threads and basting threads. Trim the interfacing to the stitching line. Then trim the seam allowance. Then we will fold back the cuff and machine it in place from the right side. I have pressed the seam towards the cuff. Fold up and align the seam lines. It's easier to pin from this side and then baste. This makes it easy to machine from the right side. Is this a bit long-winded? I usually prefer to do it this way, but if you are an experienced sewer, you may want to take shortcuts. So, stitch in the ditch from the right side. If your machine is a flatbed, then have the pants inside out. A free arm machine makes it easy to stitch from the right side. Top stitch to finish. The harem pants are finished. A classic garment that is so wearable today. An elasticated waistband works well with cottons, but is a little bulky here even though this denim is lightweight. So you could make this pattern with a normal waistband and have a zip in the back seam or side seam. These two contrasting fabric types look quite different when worn. I'm quite sure I'll be making this up again. Single cotton jersey would work very well, and try it with silks for the evening. Download the pattern from angelakane.com. Full membership gives you access to all my patterns, and you can buy them individually. I hope you enjoyed following me making up this pattern. Thank you so much for watching.